A German shepherd waits in silence, its eyes filled with sadness and confusion. Years of abandonment have stolen its trust, leaving it fearful of anyone who approaches. One day, a man enters the shelter and stops in front of the dog's cage. The dog freezes. Something about the man feels familiar. Could this man be connected to its past? What follows is an emotional reunion that will prove the power of love and memory. In a quiet shelter, a German shepherd lies alone, its once shiny coat now dull and tangled. The shelter's cold walls echo with the sound of distant barking, but the dog remains still, as if waiting for something that never comes. The years of neglect have left their mark, both physically and emotionally. This dog, who once knew what it was like to run freely and be loved, now only knows the emptiness of abandonment. Every day, the dog lies in its cage, staring out with eyes that have seen too much pain. It is a shadow of the energetic animal it used to be. It no longer trusts the people who come and go, the kindness of the shelter workers who try to offer comfort. The dog has learned to expect little and trust less. Its spirit seems broken, but deep down there is a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone will come to rescue it. The shelter staff try to help, but there is little they can do. They feed the dog, keep it clean, and offer affection, but nothing seems to break through the wall the dog has built around itself. For months, the dog's routine remains unchanged. Day after day, it lies in the corner of its cage, too exhausted to hope for anything more. But inside this German shepherd's heart, there's a memory of a time before the cage, a time when it was loved and cared for, when it had a family to call its own. Those memories are faint, like a dream slipping away as soon as it's touched, but they still remain. The bond the dog once had with its owner was strong, filled with trust, companionship, and love. Yet it has been so long that the dog is unsure if those moments were real or if they were simply a forgotten story in the depths of its mind. Then one day, something changes. A man enters the shelter, his eyes scanning the rows of cages. When he stops in front of the German shepherd's cage, everything falls silent. The dog looks up, its heart racing. There is something in the man's eyes, a familiarity, a connection. Could this be the one the dog has been waiting for? The shelter was a cold and unfamiliar place for the German shepherd. Once a strong and proud dog, it now lay in a cage, worn down by the trials of life. It had endured so much in its years: neglect, abandonment, and the slow decline of its spirit. The world beyond the cage was an enigma, filled with sounds and movements that held no meaning for it anymore. The dog had given up, unable to trust anyone, unable to remember what it was like to feel safe and loved. Its fur was matted, its eyes dull, and its body frail. Each day felt the same. It was just another day in a long string of days filled with loneliness and uncertainty. In the shelter, there were other animals, but none of them seemed to have the same air of sadness as the German shepherd. The other dogs would bark excitedly when people walked past, wagging their tails, hoping for attention. But the German shepherd barely moved, its gaze fixed on the wall, lost in thoughts of a past that it could no longer clearly recall. It had been abandoned by its owner, the one person it had trusted, the one person who had once shown it love. But that love had faded, and the dog had been left behind, wandering from place to place, always searching for the familiar scent, the familiar face. But it never found them. It only found new cages, new faces, and more rejection. Maria, one of the shelter workers, had noticed the dog from the very first day she arrived. She was a kind woman, dedicated to helping the animals in her care. But the German Shepherd stood out to her. Its eyes were different, filled with a sadness that seemed to penetrate deep into her heart. It was as if the dog had given up on the world, and that made her want to try even harder to reach it. But no matter what she did, the dog remained distant. She would sit by its cage, speaking softly to it, hoping to coax some reaction, but the dog never responded. Its gaze would flicker to her for a moment, but then it would look away, retreating further into itself. At first, Maria didn't understand why the dog acted this way. She had worked with countless animals, many of whom had been through hardships far worse than the German Shepherds. But those animals had learned to trust again, had learned to feel safe in the presence of humans. This dog, however, seemed different. It seemed to be drowning in its own grief, unable to move past the pain it had endured. Maria couldn't help but wonder what had happened to this dog, what had caused it to close itself off from the world so completely. She learned over time that the German Shepherd had not always been this way. There had been a time when it was full of life, when it had been the companion of a loving family. But that time seemed like a distant dream now. The family that had once cared for it had disappeared, leaving the dog to fend for itself. There was no explanation for their departure. One day, the dog had simply found itself abandoned in an empty house, with no one to call its own. From there, it had wandered, from shelter to shelter, never staying in one place for too long. The German Shepherd had learned to survive, but it had also learned not to trust. The bonds it had formed in the past had been broken, and the scars from that betrayal ran deep. Maria tried everything she could think of to help the German Shepherd. She brought it toys, hoping it would show some interest in playing. She gave it treats, hoping it would remember the joy of eating something delicious. But the dog remained indifferent to everything she offered. The toys were ignored, the treats left uneaten. It seemed that nothing could break through the wall the dog had built around itself. Maria's heart ached for the German Shepherd. She couldn't understand why the dog was so resistant to any form of care. She knew that many animals who had been abandoned struggled to trust. But the German Shepherd's pain went deeper. It wasn't just that the dog was afraid. It was as if it had completely shut itself off from the possibility of love. It had no interest in forming any connection. And that was the hardest part for Maria. She couldn't help but feel that if only the dog could understand that she wasn't going to abandon it, things could be different. But the dog's past had taught it not to trust, and every attempt Maria made to connect only pushed it further away. The shelter staff did their best to give the German Shepherd the care it needed. They provided food, water, and shelter, but they could not offer the emotional support the dog desperately needed. The shelter was overcrowded, and the staff was stretched thin. While they cared for the dogs and tried to give them attention, there was only so much they could do. The German Shepherd's emotional healing would require more than they could provide. Maria knew that the dog needed more than what the shelter could offer. It needed a home, a place where it could feel safe again. But finding a family that would take in a dog with such deep emotional scars seemed impossible. Maria began to wonder if the German Shepherd would ever be able to trust again, if it would ever be able to heal. The dog seemed so broken, so distant. Each day that passed without any progress felt like a step backward, and Maria began to feel helpless. She wanted to see the dog happy again, but it seemed like an impossible task. One afternoon, Maria received a call from a local vet who specialized in treating traumatized animals. The vet had heard about the German Shepherd's condition and wanted to help. Maria was relieved to hear that there was someone who might be able to help the dog. She arranged for the vet to visit the shelter, hoping that the expert care would make a difference. The vet arrived the next day and examined the German Shepherd carefully. He noted the dog's frail condition, its weakened joints, and the signs of emotional trauma that were still evident in its behavior. "This dog has been through a lot," the vet said gently. "It's not just physically weak, it's emotionally scarred as well. Healing will take time, but it's possible. With the right care and a lot of patience, this dog can recover." Maria felt a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt that there was hope for the German Shepherd. The vet suggested a treatment plan that included pain medication for the dog's stiff joints and supplements to help with its overall health. He also recommended a gradual approach to rebuilding the dog's trust, one that would involve slow, consistent exposure to positive experiences. Maria was determined to follow the vet's advice, hoping that this might be the key to helping the German Shepherd heal. Over the next few weeks, Maria worked tirelessly with the dog. She followed the vet's plan to the letter, administering medication, helping the dog with its physical exercises, and spending as much time as she could by its side. At first, the progress was slow. The German Shepherd would still shy away from her touch, its body tense and alert at every movement. But slowly, there were signs of improvement. The dog's coat became shinier, its eyes less clouded with fear. It began to show more interest in its surroundings, even if only for a few moments at a time.
One of the most important steps in the healing process was helping the German Shepherd reconnect with its past, even if that past was filled with pain. Maria began to use familiar scents and sounds to help the dog remember the life it had before the shelter. She played recordings of the dog's old name being called, hoping to trigger a memory. She brought in an old blanket, one that smelled like the dog's previous owner, in the hope that it would bring some comfort. And slowly, bit by bit, the German Shepherd began to open up again. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Maria hope. There were still moments of fear, moments when the dog would retreat back into its shell, but they were becoming less frequent. With each small step forward, the bond between Maria and the dog grew stronger. The German Shepherd still had a long way to go, but at least now it was beginning to trust again. And with that trust came the possibility of healing, the possibility of a new life. The German Shepherd had spent so many months in the shelter, its spirit weighed down by the past. Every day felt the same, full of uncertainty and fear. But today was different. Today, there was hope. The shelter staff had called for help from a rescue organization, and a team had arrived to take the dog into their care. Maria watched from the side as the volunteers prepared for the rescue. She had seen many dogs come and go, but this time it was different. This was the moment that could change everything for the German Shepherd. This was the rescue that could give the dog a new chance at life. The volunteers approached the cage slowly, their movements calm and deliberate. They knew that rushing things would only make the dog more frightened. The German Shepherd was lying on the floor, its eyes half closed, as if it had already given up. It was used to people coming and going, but there had never been anyone who stayed. There had never been anyone who truly cared. But something in the way the volunteers moved made the dog look up, just for a moment. There was a glimmer of recognition in its eyes, a hint of curiosity. The volunteers held out their hands, trying to show the dog that they meant no harm. But the German Shepherd remained still, not sure whether to trust them. Maria stepped forward, taking a deep breath. She had spent so much time with this dog, trying to break through the wall of pain and fear that had surrounded it. She knew that this was the right moment, the moment when the dog needed to trust again. She spoke softly to the German Shepherd, calling its name in a gentle tone. The dog's ears twitched at the sound of its name. It didn't move, but there was a noticeable shift in its posture. For the first time in a long while, the dog seemed to acknowledge that it was not alone. Slowly, the volunteers approached the German Shepherd, using soft voices and gentle gestures to reassure it. They reached into the cage, carefully pulling the door open. The dog didn't move at first, unsure of what to do. It was used to being left behind, to being forgotten. But the sight of the volunteers, their faces filled with kindness, stirred something in the dog. Maybe it was the comfort of a familiar voice. Maybe it was the gentle touch of a hand that wasn't filled with cruelty or neglect. Whatever it was, the German Shepherd began to stand. Its legs were shaky, weak from months of neglect, but it rose to its feet. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. The volunteers moved quickly but calmly, gently coaxing the dog into the open space outside its cage. For a moment, the German Shepherd hesitated, looking back at the shelter behind it. It was uncertain, afraid of leaving the only place it had known for so long. But then, as if something deep within it knew it was time, the dog stepped forward. Maria felt her heart swell as she watched the German Shepherd take that first step out of the cage. It wasn't easy. The dog was weak, and it was scared. But it moved. It moved toward the people who were offering it a new life, toward a chance for something better. The volunteers led the German Shepherd toward the waiting van. The dog was trembling, but there was something else in its eyes now. It was no longer just fear. It was a spark of hope, a realization that maybe, just maybe, there was something more waiting for it beyond the shelter. Maria stood back, watching as the volunteers helped the German Shepherd into the van. She knew that the dog was not completely healed yet, but this moment was the beginning of its journey to recovery. This was the turning point, the moment when everything could change. The ride to the rescue organization's facility was long, but the German Shepherd did not fight it. It was quiet, lying down in the van, exhausted from the emotional turmoil it had just experienced. For a while, it seemed to be lost in its own world, unsure of what was happening. But there was a noticeable change. The tension in its body had eased slightly. It was still afraid, but it was no longer as stiff with fear. The volunteers spoke to the dog in soft voices, trying to reassure it that everything would be okay. It was a long journey, but they were determined to help this dog find its way to a better life. When they arrived at the facility, the volunteers took the German Shepherd into a spacious room. It was a new environment filled with unfamiliar smells and sounds. But it was also a safe environment, one that was free of the neglect and pain the dog had known for so long. The staff at the rescue organization worked quickly to assess the dog's condition. They offered food and water, but the German Shepherd was too tired to eat. It lay down on the soft bed provided for it, its eyes heavy with exhaustion. But there was a sense of relief in the air. For the first time in a long time, the dog was in a place where it could heal. Over the next few days, the rescue team worked to care for the German Shepherd. They provided food, medical attention, and plenty of time for rest. Slowly, the dog began to show signs of improvement. It was still wary, still cautious, but there was something different about it now. The fear was no longer all-encompassing. It was beginning to understand that it was safe. It was beginning to realize that it wasn't going to be abandoned again. And for the first time in a long time, the German Shepherd began to respond. It accepted the gentle touch of the volunteers. It took small steps toward the people who cared for it. It was not yet ready to trust completely, but it was beginning to let go of the fear that had held it back for so long. Maria kept in contact with the rescue organization, checking in on the German Shepherd's progress. She was relieved to hear that the dog was adjusting to its new surroundings. The recovery was slow, but it was happening. Each day the dog grew a little stronger, a little more trusting. Maria felt a deep sense of peace knowing that the dog was finally in a place where it could heal. The pain and fear that had defined its life for so long were beginning to fade, replaced by hope and the possibility of a new future. The German Shepherd was still far from being the dog it had once been. There was a long road ahead, filled with challenges and setbacks. But the rescue was a turning point. It was the moment when the German Shepherd had been given a chance to heal, a chance to trust again, and that, more than anything, was the most important thing. The rescue had not only saved the dog from its painful past, it had given it the opportunity to start fresh, to live the life it deserved. The days following the German Shepherd's rescue were filled with challenges, but there was an undeniable sense of hope that hung in the air. After the initial shock of the transition, the dog began to show signs of improvement, little by little. The shelter and rescue team worked around the clock to ensure that the German Shepherd was given the time and space it needed to heal. The road ahead would be long, but every small milestone was a victory. At first, the German Shepherd was weak, physically exhausted from months of neglect. Its body had endured so much pain and suffering, but the heart and spirit of the dog remained intact. The healing process was not only physical, it was emotional too. The trauma from the past had left scars that would take time to heal. Yet the dog was resilient. It had come this far, and with the right care, it could recover completely. The first milestone came after a few days when the dog started to eat again. For the first time, it seemed interested in the food placed in front of it. At first, the German Shepherd was hesitant, sniffing the food cautiously, unsure if it could trust the people offering it. But after a few moments, the dog took a bite. It was a small act, but for those watching, it felt like a huge step forward. The dog was regaining its appetite, a sign that it was beginning to trust its new surroundings. The next few days saw small improvements. The German Shepherd's coat, which had been dull and patchy, started to shine a little brighter. With proper nutrition and care, the dog's fur began to grow back. The volunteers noticed that the dog was standing up more often, stretching its legs, and even attempting to walk around the room. These small, cautious steps were an important part of the recovery process. It was still uncertain, but there was a sense of curiosity in the dog's eyes now. It was beginning to explore its environment, slowly gaining confidence. The recovery team had implemented a daily routine to help the German Shepherd feel more secure. Every morning, the dog would be fed and allowed to rest in a quiet space. The volunteers worked with it gently, encouraging it to walk and move around but never forcing it. The key was patience. The German Shepherd was still learning to trust people again. It had been so used to neglect and loneliness, so it was no wonder that it would be cautious. The team understood that trust had to be rebuilt slowly and carefully. Over the next couple of weeks, the German Shepherd's condition continued to improve. The physical signs of neglect began to fade, but there were deeper scars that could not be seen on the surface. The dog would flinch at sudden movements, and the sound of loud voices would make it retreat to a corner. These were clear signs of the trauma the German Shepherd had endured. But each time the dog flinched, the volunteers would approach with calm and gentle hands. They understood that it was not a matter of disciplining the dog, it was a matter of giving it time and understanding. One of the most remarkable things was how the German Shepherd started to interact with the other dogs at the rescue. In the beginning, the dog kept its distance, unsure of how to communicate or whether it could trust its fellow animals. But slowly, the German Shepherd began to show interest in the other dogs. It would watch them from across the room, observing their playful behavior, their relaxed demeanor. The volunteers encouraged the interactions, making sure they were safe and comfortable for the dog. Eventually, the German Shepherd started to approach the other dogs. At first, it was cautious, but soon it was wagging its tail at them. The transformation was beautiful. The dog was starting to show signs of normal behavior again. It was no longer the withdrawn and fearful animal that had entered the rescue weeks before. The dog was becoming more social and trusting. By the third month, the German Shepherd's progress was nothing short of inspiring. The dog had gained weight, its fur had become full and glossy, and its eyes had a spark of life that had been missing for so long. It was starting to engage with the volunteers in new ways. The dog would approach them and nuzzle their hands, seeking affection. The volunteers were thrilled to see the change, but they knew that the most important milestone was still to come, finding the right forever home. The emotional recovery was the hardest part, and it would take longer than any of them expected. The German Shepherd still had moments of fear, moments when the past seemed to overwhelm it. But each day, the dog became a little braver. It would take a few steps forward and then retreat back, but with every retreat, there was a sense of determination. The fear was not as powerful as it had once been. The dog was beginning to realize that not all people were cruel, that not all places were filled with hurt. It was learning to trust again. In the meantime, the German Shepherd continued its rehabilitation. The volunteers worked on basic commands, teaching the dog how to respond to simple cues like sit and stay. It was a slow process, but it was clear that the dog was intelligent and eager to please. The German Shepherd responded to positive reinforcement, its tail wagging at the sound of praise. It was learning to be a dog again, to experience the simple joys of being cared for and loved. Then came the breakthrough moment. One afternoon, a potential adopter arrived at the rescue. It was a couple, kind-hearted and patient, who had been searching for the right dog to adopt. They had heard about the German Shepherd's story and were drawn to its journey of recovery. The volunteers watched as the couple approached the dog, their voices gentle, their movements slow. The German Shepherd hesitated at first, unsure of the new people in front of it, but then something remarkable happened. The dog took a few cautious steps forward and sniffed the couple's hands. It was a small act, but it was a sign of acceptance. The couple, sensing that the German Shepherd was still unsure, took a step back. They did not rush. They gave the dog time. Slowly, over the course of the next few days, the dog began to trust the couple more and more. The volunteers could see that the bond was forming. The German Shepherd was ready for its new home, ready to start the next chapter of its life. When the day finally came for the dog to leave the rescue, there was a bittersweet moment. The German Shepherd had become a part of the team's heart. It had made incredible progress, but it was time for it to leave and begin its life anew. The volunteers said their goodbyes, watching as the German Shepherd walked into its new life with its new family. The dog had come so far, and now it was ready to experience the love and stability it had always deserved. The German Shepherd's journey was far from over. There would still be moments of doubt, moments when the past would resurface. But the dog was stronger now, braver, and more trusting. It had overcome the odds, and its future was bright. It had been given a second chance, and it was taking it one step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, the German Shepherd's transformation was becoming more and more evident. The once emaciated and fearful dog was now a picture of strength and vitality. The scars of the past still lingered, but they were no longer the defining features of this brave animal. With each passing day, the dog grew more confident and comfortable in its new surroundings. It was a journey that spoke of resilience, hope, and the power of love. The first noticeable change was the dog's appearance. When it first arrived at the rescue, its coat had been thin and patchy, a clear sign of neglect. The fur had been matted and lifeless, a reflection of the suffering it had endured. But under the care of the volunteers, the coat began to shine. With a healthy diet and regular grooming, the dog's fur grew back thick and lustrous. It was no longer the sad, malnourished animal that had stumbled into the rescue, but a beautiful German Shepherd that radiated health and vitality. Physically, the dog had also gained strength. The bones that had once protruded from its frail body were now covered with muscle and fat. Its posture had improved, and it no longer moved with the slow, stiff gait it had when it was first rescued. Instead, the dog walked with confidence, its tail held high and its steps strong. The transformation was not just cosmetic. The dog's internal strength was also being restored. It was beginning to move through the world as a dog should, full of energy and curiosity. The German Shepherd's confidence grew alongside its physical recovery. No longer did it shy away from people or other animals. The dog had learned to trust again. It would approach the volunteers eagerly, its tail wagging, looking for affection. The shy, withdrawn animal that had once cowered in fear was now actively seeking out interaction. The transformation from a scared, broken creature to a loving and trusting companion was nothing short of miraculous. The dog's playful side began to emerge as well. Where once it had been hesitant to engage with the other dogs in the rescue, it now enjoyed playing with them. The dog would chase after balls, wrestle with its fellow canines, and even show off its agility. It was clear that the German Shepherd was no longer just recovering, it was thriving. The bond between the dog and its caregivers also grew stronger. The volunteers had seen the dog at its lowest point, but they also had the privilege of witnessing its incredible recovery. Every new step, every new achievement was a testament to the dedication and love that had gone into its care. And as the dog thrived, so did the hearts of those who had worked so hard to bring it back to life. One of the most heartwarming moments of the transformation came when the dog's true personality began to shine through. While the initial days had been filled with uncertainty and fear, the dog was now showing its joyful, playful, and loving nature. It would greet the volunteers with a wagging tail and bright eyes, eager for attention. It was clear that the German Shepherd had found its confidence again, and that confidence was only growing. As the weeks passed, the dog's physical and emotional recovery seemed to complete itself. It was no longer just a rescued animal. It had become a testament to the healing power of love and care. The transformation was so profound that it was almost hard to remember the broken dog that had first entered the rescue. Now it was a happy, healthy, and confident German Shepherd, full of life and ready for the next chapter. The story of this German Shepherd's transformation was a reminder of the power of second chances. The dog had been broken, abandoned, and forgotten, but with the right care and the right people, it had been given a new life. It was now thriving in every sense of the word, physically, emotionally, and mentally. The transformation was complete, but the journey was far from over. This dog's story was just beginning, and the future was full of possibilities. The incredible journey of this German Shepherd is a reminder of how powerful second chances can be. This dog went from suffering and neglect to finding love, trust, and a future full of hope. But there are many more animals out there who need our help. You have the power to make a difference. If this story moved you, consider supporting rescue efforts by donating to animal shelters and organizations that work tirelessly to save animals in need. You can also adopt a rescue dog, providing a loving home to one of the many animals waiting for a second chance. Even if adoption is not an option for you, you can still help by sharing stories like this one. The more people who know about these animals, the more lives we can change together. Join the mission to give animals the love and care they deserve. Every small act of kindness counts. Together, we can save more lives.